Thanks, Tom, for joining us on Winning Ways here on Asia Biz today.
Thanks.
I'll start by asking you, you've been a professional CEO and you've been an entrepreneur yourself. How do you relate these experiences? What has been your take on it?
Well, I think probably being an entrepreneur is easier than being a CEO. It's for me, it was sort of a pinnacle of a career. As you climb up through the corporate ladders or you build businesses, the title is more, I think, more attractive than the reality. Not all CEOs are paid multiples of millions of dollars, but I think they all work just as hard. The challenge really is, as a CEO, as much as you can be a leader in a company, sometimes it's like trying to turn the Titanic. It turns very slowly. Even with the most dynamic ideas, sometimes it's very difficult to change an embedded architecture or a concept that someone had put into the company prior to your coming. I think being an entrepreneur is a little bit easier because you start with clean sheets of paper, or you discover something that can be enhanced, and then you take it to a new level. But either one is exciting, definitely challenging, a lot of sleepless nights, but other than that, it's been a lot of fun.
Given a chance, what would you prefer? Being CEO of a large enterprise or being an entrepreneur?
I think being an entrepreneur, I'll be honest with you. I think if somebody said to me, what's the most rewarding part, it's not always about the money. Of course, money is an important motivator. When you do a startup, you get to work with young people. I think that's the coolest part. You see people come to you, you think you have an idea, and then you have a young person come across your desk or a table, or you're at a meeting and somebody throws an idea out there and the light goes on. Or you can see their face light up, you share an experience, and they sit there and they go, I've been looking for that answer. And now you plug it into a young person's mind and then let them run with it. That's fun. Because it reinvigorates me. I've been in business for a long time. To see somebody take a concept and then run with it is enjoyable to me. I can put a smile on my face every day. I'm never intimidated by them being smarter than me, but it's really a sharing, and you get to share when you're doing an entrepreneurial idea or a startup, or whether it's an incubator or you're taking something that's come out of phase 1, you're at phase 2, and somebody hands it to you, and then you can take it and sort of grow it a little bit more. That's fun. It's exhilarating.
So what have been the defining moments in your career, which you could, after all these years, you could relate back?
I think, believe it or not, I went to a military school as a young man when it was not particularly fashionable to go to military school. It was at the end of the Vietnam War. People thought I was crazy. But it gave me a discipline that I would not have gotten growing up in not that I enjoyed my family's home, but being away from it gave me a different respect, prepared me more for my college periods, and it's also given me a discipline in life that I can fall back on from my early days. But I met people internationally for the first time. Being from New York is a cosmopolitan city, but it really isn't. It's just a big city in America, and pretty much all New Yorkers sort of think the same, except for the visitors. Going into an international school at a young age, I met people from all over the world. There were 500 other cadets in my school, and a lot of them, their parents were connected to the United Nations. So I met kids from South America and Africa and Europe and North America and Asia when I would have never had that opportunity at that point in time. That really helped me a lot to not be afraid of stepping out of my comfort zone in the U.S. to come to Asia. When my industry expanded to Asia, the commodities industry definitively has migrated to Asia in the last 10 years. And I've been able to take that early days discipline and an understanding of other cultures and come to Asia and explore it and enhance it. So it's been good for me.
Taking it further on that, you've worked across Asia. You worked with different markets, particularly India, China, and of course you're based here in Singapore and Southeast Asia. What has been your biggest challenge managing people across these markets?
I think being an American was my biggest challenge. I think the United States is a wonderful democracy in and of itself. It has a very unique culture, a culture that, from the U.S. perspective, they want to spread the concept of free trade and democracy and good rule of law and such. But the reality is, when you step out of that, you realize that the world's a big place. It's not America-centric. That's been a great eye-opener for me, and every culture is different, is what I found out. I mean, when I first started to travel to Asia, it was pretty much Japan and China specific back in the 90s. And then I moved to Japan, and then I started to run businesses for what's now the CME group across Asia. And, you know, so I started in Japan and went to Korea and I went to China. That was overwhelming in and of itself. From a Western perspective, and not to be sarcastic, they all look alike. They're not. And I learned that very early days, that they're very unique cultures, even within themselves, working just from north to south in Japan, Korea, China, vastly different in their north, south, east, and west, their business, their cultures, their dialects, food, any number of ways, and I had to learn all of that. It was interesting, sometimes frustrating. Language is a big barrier. I've actually been quite lucky, because English, in the same time that I've been in Asia, English has become more of a language, especially for the young people. It still doesn't prevail, so I've had to learn some languages which I would have never learned living back in New York, in the American English cocoon. That's been a great experience. The way I learned the languages was I read maps. So when I would travel to different countries, the first thing I'd do is I'd get a subway map or a transportation map, and I'd figure out, if I was looking at the different, you know, whether it's kanji or the Chinese characters or Kongol in Korea, it gave me a sense of that I could get connected at least. I could start to read things, and then the language came a little bit after that. And then at least it gave me some context in the business. I could start to have a better sense when you're sitting at a business meeting or you're chatting with people socially. You can start to get a concept of what their view is on the world, not imposing my view. Let me get their view, and then you sort of marry the two.
So today, in a globalized context, I mean, what would be your advice to youngsters who are probably, you know, looking out or moving from their so-called cocoons and, you know, exploring the world?
Get out and see the world, and do it as young as you can. Don't be afraid. Respect your parents, but they're a different generation, and I learned that too. The word globalization is a little bit dangerous, because I think technologically we've globalized, but from a humanitarian perspective, we're still very much, our comfort zone is within our own culture, our own religions, our own races, our own geographies, our own industries, and education is a challenge at different levels for people, but the spirit of people, I think, is the same. I've been to pretty much every continent in the world, and introduce me to a 16 or an 18 or a 20-year-old kid, they all have that same gleam in their eye. They do, whether it's in the middle of India or Western China or Northern Japan or Canada or Mexico or Brazil or South Africa. The kids are motivated. That, I think, is global. The wonderful thing about technology is people get the information. Information is, we've flattened out the information age. The challenge now is, how do you convert that massive information that's being given to all people equally, especially the youngest generations, and then how do you incubate that into something that transcends a culture or a race or a concept? That's the next step. So for young people, go, because your earliest concepts are the concepts you'll carry through the rest of your life. If you become too staid and too conservative in your comfort zone, it's very hard to change when you're in your 30s, 40s, or 50s. It's almost impossible. But in your teens and your early 20s, whether it's through education or travel or community service, or if your school or your family, you have the privilege to do it. Take the chance to do it. And then, even if you bring those ideas back to your home country, at least you've got a different view on the world. And it'll give you a very different viewpoint as you go into business and education going further on.
Today we see a lot of stress on, you know, innovation happening. So, what is your take on that? I mean, do you really think that there is innovation in the real sense happening? And if so, I mean, which are the sectors which have impressed you?
Well, what's impressed me? Actually, if you go back, one of the things I'm disappointed, there are no real new industries, I'll be honest with you. And I think part of the challenges in the post-Lehman Brothers world is, if you go back to the NASDAQ bubble of 2000, you still had industries built after that. You know, the reinvigoration in the early 2000s, even though you had the trials of, you know, you had 9/11 and you had a number of other political turmoils that created issues for people, there still was industrial change or reinvigoration of certain industries, the railroad industry like in North America, the energy industry, revolutions. The last few years we really haven't had anything. Technology, I love Apple, but you can't eat it, you can't wear it, you can't sleep in it, you can't spend it. It's wonderful. Similarly to Facebook, I mean, Alibaba actually is a service industry. I mean, Alibaba and Amazon, I could say, actually perform some services beyond just online advertising. They actually do. I mean, the invigoration of businesses on the back end of the Alibaba structure, I think, is quite interesting. But that's fairly China unique. The lack of, and I'm not talking about reindustrialization, but the reality is, if you look at the rise of Apple early days, or you look at the rise of Microsoft, or you look at the rise of Oracle, or Infosys, or Wipro, these guys, they built industries and employed people. Actually, we're going the other way. We're actually de-employing people with the efficiencies of technology, and at the same time, not particularly building anything other than, I think, Elon Musk and his technology around the concept of electronic vehicles. I think that is revolutionary, but how scalable is it? I'm not quite sure. A lot of industries are chasing him now, believing that they could, but I think that's just competition as opposed to creative ingenuity. Blockchain technology, I think, is quite interesting. It's disruptive technology. And it's interesting what drove it. It came out of sort of the dark side of the moon, you know, the Bitcoin and everything, and that, you know, Silk Road and everything like that. The reality is it's revolutionary. That is a very interesting technology relative to, for securitization and efficiency of payments, and that actually could have a systemic change relative to the banking industry. But the reality is, if they employ blockchain, you'll probably disemploy about 15 to 20% of the entire banking industry. So great on one hand, bad on the other when it comes to employment. So that's the challenges, and I find the lack of innovation. If we're totally, like you talk about these hackathons that go on, and some brilliant companies come out of these hackathons today, right? And suddenly we've created instant valuation for an app that goes on, and investors are willing to just throw large amounts of money. You can go to Vegas and bet the same amount of money. Odds may be a little bit better coming out of a hackathon, but does it really produce anything? That's a big question mark for me.
So has innovation all come about to be spelled like APP?
Yeah. It looks like it at the moment, doesn't it? I don't know. I mean, I think anything else, you go through phases. I think the app world is getting a little bit exhausted. I think the Zuckerberg-esque concept of that if I can do this when I'm 18, 19, 20, I'll be a billionaire when I'm 32. Reality is very few people have reached that level. Can you be a millionaire today? Yeah, pretty easily. The question is, what do you do after that? You know, is your whole life about, oh, I wrote that app when I was 19. I'm now 47. I haven't done anything since I was 19 except spend the money I made then. You've got to create continuity. What goes after the, in the post-app world? How do people continue to be innovative or give back?
Do you think there's a lot more innovation happening on the social entrepreneurship side? I mean, are people working towards developing communities, and basically, which is probably not so glamorous as many of the other things that we keep reading about?
Yeah, I think they are. I think one of the things I can relate that to is, I mean, especially for India or for Bangladesh, the microbanking sector that evolved 15, 20 years ago, that concept of microloans, I think that was brilliant. And that was very physical in how it was handled at that time. You've now got an application of, you've got an architecture that can create social lending structures and taken that scale, so you applied technology to that same concept of communities. I think that's good stuff. Yeah, it's not the sexiest thing in the world. Does it make you an instant millionaire? Not necessarily, but does it have great give back to society? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where you've got that next step of how do you step across that line from the world of instant gratification to long-termism, meaning what's it going to be in 3 months, 3 years, a decade? What are the reward structures and how scalable are those things? I think, yeah, from if you call it social engineering or social interaction, I think that's really the key going forward. I think, unfortunately, we're trapped very much in a stock market-driven quarter-on-quarter performance that makes it very short-sighted. How do you manage those events?
You come from a background of the finance industry,
yeah.
commodities.
Yeah.
So do you see a lot of disruption on the anvil in that sector? I mean, with some of these big players like Google and Facebook's probably trying to get there?
I'm actually surprised they haven't gotten there already. I was sort of, a couple of years ago, we were looking at Apple, their innovation and what they were doing, the life post-iPhone. I really expected Apple to have an exchange by this point in time. If you look at the electronic world and world global connectivity, they've chosen to go another way. They're going to become a banker. So like Alipay on the back of Alibaba, Apple Pay, and so you're going to have these bank systems as opposed to, so payments seems to be preempting the concept of trading. But that's then again, that's the backbone of trading, is the payment systems and technology and the efficiencies of it. So commodities are commodities. They're always going to be the same. You got to feed the world. You got to feed it and clothe it and drive it. Whether it's clean energies or anything. I mean, even clean energies, even solar energy is driven by a backbone of commodities. People don't realize what it takes to make a solar panel. There's a lot of commodities that go into a solar panel. So you've got an inherent demand scenario. Even if you're switching the concept of whether it's a renewable energy versus a fossil energy, you still have a transition of commodity demand. It'll always be there.
What would be your 3 pieces of advice to entrepreneurs starting out?
3 pieces of advice. Don't be afraid. There was a great speech that was made a number of years ago by a friend of mine, and his name was Paul Jones. At that time, he's known as Paul Tudor Jones. I knew Paul in early days. He and I traded cotton together back in the late 70s, early 80s when we were kids. And Paul made a speech, and it was called the F word. And of course, immediately people think, oh, the F word. No. He wasn't talking about the F word. He was talking about the F word, failure. All great entrepreneurs, all successful people fail. You can't be afraid of failure. I think, unfortunately, especially across this part of the world, early days people are embedded with, don't fail, don't make a mistake. Well, if your concept in life is to not make a mistake, you're never going to try. Because all you're going to do is concentrate on not making a mistake. That's not a learning exercise. That's a fear exercise. The other F word. Don't be afraid to fail. And you need to be supported in that. Your parents have to be able to support you in that. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of parents are like, oh, don't make any mistakes. Don't want you to. All great leaders have failed and learned from their mistakes. All great entrepreneurs have failed and learned from their mistakes. All great businessmen have failed and learned from their mistakes. The key is to learn from your mistakes, and that's the second point. Learn from your mistakes. Don't be afraid to make an error, but the key is to learn from your error and to move on. And what's the third one is treat all people fairly. This is not a vertical society. It's a flat society. Whether somebody's older than you and younger than you, that's just respect. He knows a little bit more than you do. Respect person in that. But it's an equal society, and that's probably the toughest one. But I think the young people, and if you look at the ethnicity of the new companies, the good companies, there is no ethnicity. I think is more importantly, you look at the officers, you look at these companies that are going, it's a company in China, but they're picking a guy out of Canada. Okay, why that? Well, just because he had this kind of a background, or it's a company in Japan. The Japanese are even slowly changing, and they're now bringing people in. I mean, Carlos Ghosn is the when when Nissan made that decision a decade ago, it was revolutionary. Well, he reinvigorated an entire auto industry, and it spread from the top down, not just at Nissan, but it went all the way across Toyota and everybody. So changes like that can be made. So I think cultural entrepreneurship is really going to be a key. We're all equal. It's about our individual talents, and stick with that. You know. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.